Robin, the hooded man. I mean, the bells, the bells! Yes, Hunchback by Century Electronics originally started life as a Robin Hood game, something that will become clear as we see all these various versions. Ocean got the rights to the UK home versions, their first official arcade conversion. They'd done quite a few arcade conversions, but the thing was, none of them had been official. Things like a Kong. You know the game. You must have played it or seen it. You are the Hunchback and you have to rescue Esmeralda by running from left to right across the screens, jumping over objects and things that can stick spears up you and so on. So start off on the Spectrum, the original version. And there's the Hunchback. And you just jump over the fireballs on the first screen. Their super bonus is something you get when you get a bell for every screen you complete, and there is a knight climbing up the wall there who will come after you very, very quickly on the Spectrum version. And if you go down to the woods today, you're sure of a big surprise. I'm not sure how that quite links up with Hunchback, but never mind. The Teddy Bear's Picnic. Quite why the Hunchback is wearing high heels, I'm not sure. Not very practical for jumping around in. Over to the BBC Micro. Originally published by Superior Software, and Ocean did a deal with them because they hadn't. Superior hadn't officially licensed the game, so Ocean published this version in the end, and Superior did the Electron version, which you'll see in a minute. And the pit you have to jump over here is, well, you could walk through it, frankly. In order to jump diagonally, you have to be walking at the same time, or you'll just jump in the air. And it gets rather clunky scrolling from screen to screen on the BBC. And over to the Electron. And yeah, it looks exactly the same, apart from the scrolling between levels or screens is slightly different. And oh, I've got the directions there because the directional jumping controls are awful. Over to the MSX. Yes, there is an MSX version. And look, they've done a proper job. Ocean have done a proper job. Whoa, at last. Well, not at last, at first. Because we all know what Ocean did with most of their MSX conversions. They were all done in a weekend in Spain and were all very poor. But this isn't. This is quite superb. It's a proper MSX game. The MSX does not need to look like a Spectrum. It does not need to be slower than the Spectrum. We have something that looks very authentic to the arcade and plays very authentic compared to the arcade as well. One thing about this MSX version is, of course, the Spectrum version came out in 1983. The MSX version is 1985, so you've got a couple of years advancement there. Over to the 64. Oh yes, you'll soon get bored of the Teddy Bear's Picnic. Well, never mind. The Hunchback is very, very small on the 64, especially when you've come across on the MSX. And there's your tiny Robin Hood or Hunchback. I mean, look, even on these conversions, obviously they've converted from the arcade accurately, but it's very clearly Robin Hood with the knights and everything. But you do get a proper deep pit on the 64, unlike the B version we saw earlier. Oh no, you see, going across all these versions, they all have slightly different mechanics in terms of how close you have to get to the edge and how you jump. But oh no, I didn't make it. You get some rope swinging noises on the 64. And we've got our super bonus there. Over to the CPC. We're starting on screen 2 on the CPC because I had problems with the capture. I forgot to plug my audio cable in. Oh, died there. CPC version originally published by Amsoft, and then also published by Ocean themselves, and given away with a lot of CPCs by Amstrad. VIC-20 gets a version, and it runs on unexpanded VIC, so don't laugh at this too much, because, okay, the rope is interesting there, in that it's vertical, but this is done in 5K. Back on the Specky. And the state of those knights there, with their sticks, their pointy sticks. The faces that will haunt me for all time. Bottom left, you can see how far along the castle you are until you reach Esmeralda. When you get all of your super bonus, you get an extra life. There's only a certain amount of variations on the screens. You start off with empty pits, then they put baddies in the pits, and then they're suddenly throwing things above you. There you go, extra life. And then you have things beneath you as well, and then it just goes, oh, this one thing's the Hunchback. Some of the screens will start with arrows firing from behind you, and you will die. This is a game cloned so many times, Punchy, by, is it Mr. Micro? And so various type-ins. I'm going to do something on ChinnyVision too about one of the type-in versions, because on the Amstrad, because it's quite interesting what they managed to do in BASIC. I'll do that at some point. Back over to the Electron. And really, I say it's not a huge amount of difference between the Electron version and the BBC. And this is the standard BBC version. Seems to be mainly just without scrolling. Which, oddly enough, is far less annoying on the Elk than it is on the Beeb. Because it takes forever to scroll on the Beeb. So you have to stand back a bit because you have to take a run up for every jump. So I'm not on the... Oh, I misjudged that. Back to the MSX. I mean, he doesn't jump very far. But, I mean, look how lovely this looks. It's a really nice port. I don't know how Ocean... I mean, look at those sprites go past, and they are sprites. Back on the Amstrad. Oh dear, arrows behind me again. But at least on the Amstrad. The Amstrad, you can do all the screens very quickly. I've noticed this when I put them all side by side. You can really hammer through the screens on the CPC in far less time than some of the other versions. My mate had this on his 464. It was a game I borrowed a couple of times, didn't really enjoy. I already had a number of... Well, I had the type-in Hunchback game, and I also had Punchy as well, so it just seemed like another game. Back on the Vic. And yes, it's very basic, but what are we expecting in this kind of memory, really? Let's time it right. Very much a kind of last... Well, not really last gasp for the Vic, but it's one of those big games that managed to make it onto the Vic before it faded in favour of the 64. There were still people like Mastertronic supporting it, but the likes of Ocean quickly fade away, don't they? It feels very lacklustre on the 64. It's just... And what you see, you have to know those arrows are going to be coming from behind you, because you've got no hope otherwise. The game is more generous on the edges, though, on the 64, I've noticed. On the BBC, some of those jumps I just did there, I would have just fallen through the bottom of the screen. Back on the MSX. It's rather lovely. How much further I can get. Oh! Running my master with the BBC B ROM. This is the final screen of the game. There's Esmeralda. She needs rescuing. Can Can I do it? No. BBC and the ARC versions, by the way, let you select any screen you want to start from, which is nice. Final screen on the 64. I have turned collision detection off because I do want to get this far. And there we go. I've rescued Esmeralda, who is much larger than me, I noticed. I mean, she's huge. She's like, I'm a tiny little Robin Hood character, and she's up there in the tower, just massive. Spectrum version final screen. The knight running behind you looks a bit more like some kind of archdeacon or something. Oh, I didn't do it! Oh. Amstrad version. Into the final screen. No, you don't see Esmeralda. The game just cycles around. Oh dear, Ocean couldn't be bothered to finish the game properly, could they? There are versions for the Dragon and the Auric. Sadly, I don't have either of those machines, so I can't look at those today. Wikipedia, I'm always complaining about Wikipedia on ChinnyVision and the state of it, says there was an Atari 8-bit version. There kind of is. There was a prototype, but it was never published. Sometimes computer games are iconic, and yet you really wouldn't want to play them today, and Hunchback falls into that category. At that time, it was an era where games were developing fast, and Hunchback borrows from games like Pitfall to further the platformer genre. However, what was innovative at the time and moved the genre on isn't necessarily what's enjoyable today. I didn't have much fun with any of these versions. The original Spectrum version feels clunky, and yes, it replicates the arcade well, and yes, it's an official arcade conversion of the first motion, but not really that enjoyable. The BBC and Electron versions, actually not bad for the platform, but again, very limited, and of course, across all these formats, this is a genre that is very quickly done to death and then not repeated. C64 version, your Hunchback sprite is very, very small, although he is quite agile and doesn't suffer from the same control issues that, say, the BBC version does. Amstrad version, where's the ending? When am I rescuing Esmeralda? It just loops around. My mate had this, but he also had Ya Kung Fu and Green Beret, and guess what I borrowed off him? Far, far more. I must also mention the VIC-20 version, which, although not an especially good game, does run on an unexpanded VIC. MSX version, though, is actually very impressive. Not because it's a particularly good game, but for once someone has done a decent tape game for the MSX. It uses the hardware capabilities of the system. It doesn't look like a Spectrum game. It doesn't run slower than a Spectrum game. It's using what the MSX can do, and it's really polished and replicates the arcade really well. So if you are going to play one of these versions, I suggest you check out the MSX, but regardless, this is a game you do need to own just to put it on the shelf because of that iconic Bob Wakelin artwork.